a pink backpack lying on the ground. That was the only thing they found. Jessica Ridgeway was 10 years old. She was walking to school like any other day. It was only 3 blocks. 3 blocks she had walked hundreds of times. But that Friday, October 5th, 2012, Jessica never made it to school. And when they finally found her, what they discovered was so disturbing, so absolutely shocking, that veteran investigators, men who had seen everything in their careers, left the crime scene crying. Some had to receive psychological treatment afterward. This case shook Colorado. It shook the entire United States. And what makes this case even more chilling, what turns it into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions, is who turned out to be responsible. It wasn't who anyone expected. In fact, when the killer's identity was revealed, the entire community was left in absolute shock. In the next few minutes, we're going to reconstruct exactly what happened that October day, how an entire community came together to search for a 10-year-old girl, the clues that appeared one by one, and how, piece by piece, investigators assembled the darkest puzzle they had ever faced in their careers. But before we continue, you need to understand something very important. This case changed laws. It changed safety protocols in schools across the country, and it left a permanent mark on everyone who experienced it, from the investigators to the neighbors who participated in the search. Stay until the end, because what you're going to hear about the perpetrator, about who he was and how he lived less than 2 miles from the victim, will leave you completely frozen. Let's begin. Westminster, Colorado. To understand this case, you first need to understand the place where it happened. Westminster is one of those typical American suburban cities, the kind of place where people move seeking peace and quiet, trying to escape the noise and chaos of big cities. Clean, well-paved streets, houses with perfectly maintained yards, green lawns, and white fences, neighbors who greet each other in the morning when they walk their dogs, barbecues on weekends, children playing in the streets until the sun goes down. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where children play outside without constant supervision, because everyone knows everyone, and everyone watches out for each other. What could happen? It's a safe neighborhood. Bad things don't happen here. That was Westminster's mentality before October 5th, 2012. Jessica Ridgeway lived on Witt Street with her mom, Sarah Ridgeway. It was a modest but cozy house, perfect for a single mother and her daughter. Sarah worked night shifts as a medical dispatcher. It was a demanding job that kept her busy during the hours when most people were sleeping. That meant Sarah often slept during the day while Jessica was at school. It wasn't an ideal situation, but Sarah did the best she could as a single mother. She worked hard to give her daughter everything she needed. Jessica's dad, Jeremiah Bryant, lived in Missouri, thousands of miles away. The parents had been separated for a long time, but Jessica maintained regular contact with her father. She visited him during vacations, and they talked on the phone frequently. Despite the distance, Jeremiah deeply loved his daughter. He was always looking out for her, sending her gifts and letters. Jessica was a typical 10-year-old girl. Absolutely typical. She loved the color pink. Her backpack was pink. Her room had pink details everywhere. If you asked her what her favorite color was, you didn't have to wait for the answer. She loved crafts. She could spend hours making beaded necklaces, drawing, or creating small art projects. She was creative and imaginative. She had a contagious laugh, the kind of laugh that makes everyone around start laughing too, even if they don't know what they're laughing about. Her classmates described her as sweet and friendly, the kind of girl who never had a bad word to say about anyone. If someone was alone at recess, Jessica was the one who would go over to keep them company. She attended Witt Elementary School, which was literally 3 blocks from her house. 3 blocks. Less than 5 minutes walking at a normal pace. It was a route Jessica knew by heart. She had walked it alone many times before. She knew every house, every tree, every crack in the sidewalk on that path. Sarah felt comfortable letting Jessica walk to school alone. After all, it was a safe neighborhood. Everyone did it. Other kids walked alone too. It was completely normal. What could happen in 3 blocks? But on Friday, October 5th, 2012, everything changed forever. Friday, October 5th, 2012. Let's reconstruct this day hour by hour because every detail matters. Sarah Ridgeway had worked all night at her shift as a medical dispatcher. She arrived home exhausted, as always after a long night of work. But before going to sleep, she made sure Jessica was ready for school. She prepared her breakfast. She checked that she had everything she needed in her backpack. She gave her a goodbye kiss. Everything was normal. It was a morning like any other. Around 8:30 in the morning, Jessica left her house heading to school. She was dressed in her typical 10-year-old clothes, a purple t-shirt with sparkly sequins that she loved, comfortable jeans, and her favorite shoes, the ones with lights that would flash and blink with every step she took. She carried her pink backpack on her shoulders, full of books and notebooks for the school day. It was a typical autumn day in Colorado. The weather was pleasant, neither too cold nor too hot. The leaves on the trees were starting to change color. The streets were quiet at that hour of the morning. Jessica walked along the sidewalk as she always did, probably humming some song, maybe thinking about what she would do that weekend with her friends, perhaps remembering some joke a classmate told her the day before. She was 10 years old. Her biggest worry in life should have been a math test, or whether she would get to watch her favorite TV show that afternoon, or what she was going to have for lunch in the cafeteria. A child's worries, innocent worries. But Jessica never made it to school that day. At some point between her house and Witt Elementary School, in those 3 short blocks, Jessica Ridgeway disappeared. And this is where the story becomes truly disturbing. Witt Elementary School had an established policy. If a student didn't arrive at class, the administrative staff was supposed to call the parents or guardians to confirm the absence and make sure everything was okay. It was a basic safety protocol, something that should have been executed automatically. But that day, for some reason that was never fully explained, the verification call to Jessica's house was not made. There was a failure in the system, human error, an oversight. Sarah was asleep in her house, recovering from her night shift, without having the slightest idea that her daughter had never arrived at class. The hours passed slowly. 8:30 a.m. Jessica leaves home. 9 a.m. Classes begin. Jessica is not in her seat. 10 a.m. Sarah is still sleeping, knowing nothing. 12 p.m. Class hours pass. No one calls. 2 p.m. Sarah possibly starts to wake up. 4 p.m. The time when Jessica should return from school. It wasn't until 4 p.m., 8 full hours after Jessica left home, when Sarah finally realized that something was terribly wrong. Jessica wasn't home. She hadn't returned from school, and there was no message, no note, no explanation. Sarah, probably with a knot starting to form in her stomach, called the school to ask if Jessica had stayed for some extracurricular activity. And then she received the news that no parent ever wants to hear. Mrs. Ridgeway, Jessica never arrived at school this morning. 8 hours. Jessica had been missing for 8 full hours and absolutely no one knew. In those 8 hours, anything could have happened. Any trail could have gone cold. Any opportunity to find her quickly had evaporated with every minute that passed. Sarah went into total panic. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. My daughter left for school this morning and never arrived. Nobody notified me. I've been hours without knowing where my daughter is. Please, I need help. Please. The desperation in her voice was palpable. The Westminster police responded to the call immediately, but everyone knew the terrible truth. They had already lost precious time they could never recover. In cases of missing children, there's what experts call the golden hour. The first hours are absolutely critical. Every minute that passes without finding the child, the chances of finding them alive decrease dramatically. And 8 full hours had already passed. 8 hours where no one searched. 8 hours where no one knew. 8 hours lost forever. The Westminster police arrived at the Ridgeway house just minutes after receiving the 911 call. The officers immediately began asking questions, trying to understand what had happened and rule out the simplest possibilities first. Were there any problems at home? Was Jessica angry with someone? Had she ever threatened to run away? Did she have any conflict with schoolmates, with neighbors, with anyone? Sarah answered all the questions as best she could through her tears. No. Everything was completely normal. Jessica was a happy, well-adjusted girl, without problems. There was no reason in the world for her to leave on her own. She had never talked about running away. She had never shown signs of being upset or scared about something. She was just a normal girl who went to walk 3 blocks to her school, as she had done hundreds of times before. The officers looked at each other. If this wasn't a voluntary runaway, then the remaining options were much more concerning. Immediately, they began to walk the route between Jessica's house and Witt Elementary School. They knocked on the door of every house along the way. They asked every neighbor they found if they had seen anything out of the ordinary that morning. Did you see Jessica walking to school? Did you see any suspicious vehicle? Did you hear anything strange? Most of the neighbors had nothing to report. It was a quiet morning like any other. No one had noticed anything out of the ordinary. But then, an officer found something that changed everything. Jessica's backpack. It was lying on the ground, abandoned near a small park that was a few blocks from her house. But there was an important detail. The backpack was not on the direct route to school. It was in a different direction. Why would Jessica have walked that way? And why would she have left her backpack lying on the ground? The officers examined the scene carefully. Next to the backpack, they found a water bottle that Jessica had been carrying with her that day. The objects were scattered on the ground in a disorderly manner, as if they had been thrown or had fallen during some kind of struggle or fight. At that moment, with a chill running down their spines, the investigators knew for certain that this was not a runaway. It wasn't a girl who simply decided not to go to school and hid somewhere to hang out. This had all the signs of a kidnapping. The emergency response machine activated at full speed. An Amber Alert was issued immediately. It was the first time in years that Westminster had activated this emergency system. Jessica's description was broadcast on all local and national television stations, on all radio stations, and on all available social media throughout Colorado and neighboring states. Her photo appeared on screens throughout the state, on digital billboards, on information screens on highways. Amber Alert, missing girl. Name, Jessica Ridgeway. Age, 10 years. Height, 4 feet, 1 inch. Weight, 60 pounds. Hair, blonde. Eyes, blue. Last seen wearing, purple t-shirt with sequins, jeans, light-up shoes. Last known location, Westminster, Colorado. If anyone had seen her, if anyone knew anything, they needed to know immediately. The clock kept running, and every second counted. What happened in the following hours and days was truly extraordinary. It was a demonstration of the power of a united community in the face of tragedy. The news of Jessica's disappearance spread through Westminster like a wildfire. Within hours, everyone knew. Everyone was talking about the girl with the pink backpack who never made it to school, and the community responded in a way that no one had seen before. Hundreds of volunteers spontaneously showed up to help in the search. Neighbors who had never exchanged more than a good morning greeting organized themselves into coordinated search groups. They went through every park in the area, searching behind every bush, under every bench, in every dark corner. They checked alleys, abandoned parking lots, empty buildings, any place where a girl could be hidden or held against her will. They carried copies of Jessica's photo. They asked every person they found, "Have you seen this girl? Do you know anything?" Any information helps. The police established a command center in a parking lot near Jessica's house. White tents, communication vehicles, officers constantly coming and going. The FBI officially joined the investigation, bringing additional resources and expertise in child abduction cases. Helicopters flew over the area constantly, equipped with high-tech thermal cameras that could detect body heat signals. They were looking for any sign that could reveal where Jessica was, if she was hidden somewhere, if someone was holding her captive. Canine units were deployed, with dogs trained specifically to follow human trails. The dogs worked tirelessly, sniffing every inch of the area where the backpack was found, trying to follow Jessica's trail. Sarah Ridgeway, with eyes red from so much crying and her voice broken with emotion, appeared at press conferences and on local and national news. "Please," she begged, looking directly at the cameras. "If someone has my daughter, please let her go. She's just a child. She hasn't hurt anyone. I just want my baby to come home. Please." It was absolutely heartbreaking to see this devastated mother, not knowing if she would ever see her daughter alive again. Jessica's dad, Jeremiah Bryant, took the first available flight from Missouri as soon as he heard the news. He arrived in Colorado with his heart in his throat, desperate to do something, anything, to find his daughter. The parents, although they had been separated for years, united in their shared desperation. The differences of the past were completely forgotten. The only thing that mattered now was Jessica. The hours turned into days, and the days felt like years. Saturday, October 6th. No signs of Jessica. The search continues. Sunday, October 7th. More volunteers join. More area covered. Still nothing. Monday, October 8th. Hope begins to fade, but no one wants to admit it. Tuesday, October 9th. Investigators work without rest. The pressure increases. There were no signs of Jessica anywhere. Hope, although no one said it out loud, was beginning to fade with every passing hour. But people kept searching, kept praying, kept believing, or at least wanting to believe, that they would find her alive, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. But everyone who had worked on missing persons cases knew the terrible statistical reality. With each day that passed without finding Jessica, the chances of finding her alive decreased dramatically. The clock kept running, relentless. While the volunteers searched the streets, investigators worked feverishly analyzing every piece of available evidence. Jessica's backpack was immediately sent to the forensic laboratory for detailed analysis. The technicians examined every inch of the material, looking for fingerprints, fibers, hairs, any trace that could indicate who else had touched that backpack besides Jessica. Inside the backpack, they found something disturbing, a note that appeared to be part of a ransom attempt or demand. But after carefully analyzing it, investigators determined it was a false lead, probably left intentionally to divert the investigation. Who would do something like that? And why? The perpetrator, whoever they were, was actively trying to confuse the police. This indicated a level of planning and premeditation that was deeply concerning. The detectives also exhaustively reviewed all security cameras in the area. Cameras from stores, from private homes, from parking lots, any device that could have recorded something relevant that morning. And they found footage of Jessica. In one of the recordings, Jessica could be clearly seen walking along the sidewalk the morning of her disappearance. She was wearing exactly the clothes her mother had described: the purple t-shirt with sequins, the jeans, the light-up shoes. She could be seen walking calmly, with no visible sign of stress or concern. It seemed like a completely normal morning for her. But at a certain point in the recording, at a specific moment, Jessica simply disappears from the camera's frame, and there are no images of the moment of the kidnapping. The perpetrator had chosen to act in a blind spot, a specific place where security cameras couldn't record, a place where he could do what he wanted without being captured on video. The investigators wondered, was this a coincidence? Or had the perpetrator studied the area beforehand? Had he walked those streets, identified where the cameras were, calculated the angles and blind spots? The evidence strongly suggested the latter. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, committed impulsively by someone who saw an opportunity and took it in the moment. Someone had carefully studied the area, knew exactly which way Jessica walked every morning, knew the route she took from her house to school, knew where security cameras were located and where there were blind spots, knew when was the best time to act, when the streets would be emptiest and there would be fewer potential witnesses. This crime had been planned in advance. It had been carefully premeditated, and that made it infinitely more terrifying, because it meant the perpetrator wasn't simply an impulsive criminal. He was someone methodical, calculating, patient, someone who had invested time and effort in planning this act. How long had he been watching Jessica? How many days had he studied her routine before deciding to act? These questions tormented the investigators as the clock kept advancing. Wednesday, October 10th, 2012. 5 complete days had passed since Jessica Ridgeway's disappearance. 5 days of relentless searching. 5 days of hope mixed with terror. 5 days of sleepless nights for Sarah Ridgeway and everyone who loved Jessica. That day, A group of volunteers was conducting a systematic search in an area called Patridge Park, located in the city of Arvada, a community neighboring Westminster. This park was approximately 9 miles from Jessica's house. It was an area with dense vegetation, tall trees, and zones with thick bushes that made visibility difficult. Why search so far from where Jessica had disappeared? Because at this point, the search teams had dramatically expanded the perimeter. They were covering an increasingly larger area, desperate to find any clue. One of the volunteers, an ordinary man who simply wanted to help find a lost girl, was walking through a section of the park with particularly dense vegetation. He noticed something strange partially hidden among the bushes and tall grass. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that didn't look natural. He approached with curiosity, not knowing what he was about to discover, and what he saw made him literally fall to his knees. They were human remains, and they were dismembered. The man, completely in shock, trembling uncontrollably, took out his cell phone and called 911 with fingers that could barely dial the correct numbers. I found something. I think it's a body. Oh my God. Please send someone. Please. Investigators and forensic teams arrived at the scene within minutes. They cordoned off the entire area and began the process of documenting and analyzing what they had found. What they found was so absolutely disturbing, so profoundly horrible, that even the most experienced detectives, men and women who had spent decades working on homicide cases, had to step away from the scene to compose themselves. Several officers cried openly. Others had to step away to vomit. Some would need psychological treatment in the weeks and months that followed. Jessica Ridgeway's body had been found, but it wasn't intact. She had been dismembered. Her small 10-year-old body had been mutilated, cut into pieces in a way that investigators could only describe as inhumane and beyond anything we've ever seen. The specific details of what had been done to Jessica were so graphic, so disturbing, that many were never revealed to the public. The authorities made the conscious decision to protect Jessica's family and the general public from knowing the full extent of the horror. But what was known was enough to chill the blood of anyone who heard it. Jessica's clothes were scattered near the remains. The purple t-shirt with sequins that her mother had helped her put on that morning, the jeans she had worn so many times before. Everything was there, discarded like trash. Forensic investigators worked meticulously, documenting every detail, collecting every piece of evidence, trying to maintain their professionalism despite the horror surrounding them. The next day, October 11, 2012, the police issued the official confirmation that everyone feared, but no one wanted to hear. The remains found in Patridge Park definitely belonged to Jessica Ridgeway. The identification was made through DNA analysis and was confirmed by Jessica's grandmother, who identified certain belongings found with the body. Sarah Ridgeway's worst nightmare, the terror she had been trying to deny for 5 entire days, had materialized in the most horrible way imaginable. Her 10-year-old daughter was dead. And not only was she dead, she had been subjected to things that no human being, especially no child, should ever experience. The search was over, but the nightmare was just beginning. The news of the discovery and confirmation of Jessica's identity hit Westminster and the entire Colorado region like an emotional earthquake of catastrophic magnitude. The people who had been searching for days, who had walked miles checking every corner, who had kept hope alive against all odds, were absolutely devastated. Many of the volunteers who had participated in the search sat on curbs and cried openly when they heard the news. Strangers hugged each other in the streets, sharing a pain that transcended any differences. Spontaneous memorials began appearing throughout the city almost immediately. In front of Jessica's house, in the park where they found her backpack, at Witt Elementary School, at Patridge Park where her body was found. In all these places, people left tributes, flowers of all colors, but especially pink ones, because everyone knew it was Jessica's favorite color. Candles that remained lit day and night, teddy bears and other stuffed animals, pink balloons floating toward the sky, and notes. Hundreds and hundreds of handwritten notes. Notes from other children who had gone to school with Jessica. "We'll miss you so much, Jessica. You'll always be our friend. Fly high, little angel. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I hope you're playing in heaven. We love you. Notes from parents who didn't know Jessica but whose hearts had broken just the same. I'll hug my children tighter today because of you. May you find the peace that was denied to you on earth. Sarah Ridgeway, with a strength that no one knows where she found, issued a public statement thanking the community for their support during the darkest days of her life. Although the outcome was not what we hoped and prayed for with all our hearts, we are deeply grateful for every person who helped search for our Jessica, for every volunteer who walked under the sun and rain, for every officer who worked tirelessly, for every person who prayed for us. Jessica was our light. She was the best part of our lives, and she always will be. No one can take away the memories of her laugh, her smile, her love. But the collective sadness quickly began to mix with something else. Rage. A burning and justified rage. Who had done this? Who was capable of doing something so monstrous to an innocent 10-year-old girl? What kind of human being, if you could even call them human, could commit such a despicable act? The police, feeling the pressure from a community demanding answers and justice, publicly promised they would find the person responsible. "We are going to find whoever did this," declared the Westminster police chief at a press conference, his voice trembling with a mix of determination and emotion. "No matter what it costs, no matter how long it takes, we will not rest until the monster who did this to Jessica is found and pays for their crimes. And when we find them," he added, "they're going to wish they had never been born." The forensic teams worked day and night analyzing every piece of evidence collected from the scene where Jessica's body was found. In cases like this, the victim's body often contains the keys to identifying the perpetrator. DNA, clothing fibers, hairs, tool marks used, injury patterns. Everything tells a story, and the forensics found something that seemed to be the key to solving the case. DNA that didn't belong to Jessica, the perpetrator's DNA. This was a monumental discovery. If they could find a match in the national DNA databases, they would have the identity of their suspect. They could arrest him and put him behind bars where he belonged. With anxious hands and hopeful hearts, the technicians uploaded the DNA profile to the CODIS system, the national database containing genetic profiles of convicted criminals and other individuals previously processed by the justice system. They waited for the results with anticipation, and when they arrived, there were no matches. Nothing. Zero. The system found no one who matched the profile. The perpetrator was not in the system. He had never been arrested for a serious crime. He had never been required to provide a DNA sample to authorities. To the police, he was a ghost, a monster without a face or name. But the investigators didn't give up. They dramatically expanded their search, exploring all possibilities. They exhaustively reviewed the records of all registered sex offenders living within a 50-mile radius. They verified their alibis, their movements, their histories. They interviewed hundreds of people: Jessica's relatives, neighbors, acquaintances, schoolmates, parents of schoolmates, anyone who might have relevant information. They followed every tip that came in through the tip line, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant it appeared. And then a new development arrived that changed the course of the investigation. A woman in Westminster came forward to the police with disturbing information. She reported that a few days before Jessica's disappearance, she had been the victim of an attempted kidnapping. She was walking near her house, in an area not far from where Jessica lived, when a young man approached her. The man had tried to force her into a vehicle. She had managed to resist and escape, but the experience had left her deeply traumatized. When she described her attacker to the police, the description matched a general profile. A young man, probably in his late teens or early 20s, wearing a dark hoodie. The investigators immediately connected the dots. The area where the woman's attempted kidnapping occurred was geographically close to where Jessica had disappeared. Could it be the same person? The theory that began to form was terrifying in its implications. This was not an isolated incident. The perpetrator had tried before and had failed. He had practiced. He had learned from his mistakes. And Jessica Ridgeway had been his first success, if such an obscene word could be used to describe something so horrible. Or were there other victims they didn't know about? The urgency to find the perpetrator intensified exponentially. If he had attacked before and had succeeded with Jessica, what would stop him from attacking again? The clock kept running, and somewhere in that seemingly quiet community, a monster walked free. And now we arrive at the part of this story that no one, absolutely no one, saw coming. A few days after Jessica's body was found, and while the investigation continued at full speed, the Westminster police received a call from a completely unexpected place. A house in Westminster. An ordinary house in an ordinary neighborhood, less than 2 miles from where Jessica Ridgeway had lived. The person calling was a mother, and what she had to report was breaking her heart as she spoke. This mother had found disturbing things in her teenage son's room. Clothes stained with what appeared to be dried blood. A backpack she didn't recognize and that definitely didn't belong to her son. And strange, erratic behavior her son had been showing in recent weeks. Something was very, very wrong. And this mother, although it broke her soul to do what she was doing, knew she had to contact the authorities. The teenager's name was Austin Sigg. He was 17 years old. When investigators arrived at the house and began asking questions, what happened next left everyone completely stunned. Austin Sigg didn't deny anything. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't invent alibis or excuses. Instead, with a calm that chilled the blood of everyone present, Austin Sigg confessed to everything. He had kidnapped Jessica Ridgeway. He had taken her to a place where no one could hear her screams. He had murdered her, and he had dismembered her. He was 17 years old. 17. A teenager still in high school. A kid who lived with his mom less than 2 miles from his victim. The community of Westminster, already devastated by Jessica's death, was left in absolute shock when the perpetrator's identity was revealed. He wasn't a stranger from another state. He wasn't a known predator with a long criminal history. He wasn't someone neighbors could point to and say, "I always knew there was something wrong with him." He was a local teenager, a kid they had probably seen at the supermarket, on the street, at community events. A monster hidden in plain sight. Austin Sigg didn't fit any typical killer profile, at least not on the surface. He was a high school student who attended classes like any other kid his age. He lived with his mom, Mindy Sigg, in a quiet, respectable Westminster neighborhood. He had no criminal record of any kind. He had never been arrested, had never had serious problems with the law, had never raised obvious red flags that would alert authorities. To the outside world, he seemed to be simply a quiet, introverted teenager, the kind of kid who goes unnoticed in school hallways, who doesn't make much noise, who doesn't attract attention. But when investigators began to dig deeper into his life and psyche, they discovered a much darker picture. Austin had a deep and disturbing obsession with death, violence, and control from a very early age. He spent endless hours studying cases of famous serial killers. He read everything he could find about them, not out of academic curiosity or interest in criminology, but out of personal fascination. He wanted to understand how they did it. He wanted to learn from them. He also obsessively researched forensic techniques, criminal investigation methods, how police solved cases. But his motivation wasn't to help solve crimes. It was to learn how to avoid being caught when he committed his own. Austin had dark fantasies that he never shared with anyone. Fantasies he had been cultivating for years. Fantasies involving kidnapping, total control over another person, torture, and murder. These weren't passing fantasies of a teenager going through a gothic phase. They were obsessive thoughts that consumed his mind, that grew stronger and more detailed over time. And finally, he had begun to act on them. Remember the attempted kidnapping of the woman a few days before Jessica disappeared? That had also been Austin. He had tried to kidnap an adult woman and had failed. She had managed to resist and escape. But instead of getting scared and stopping, Austin learned from the experience. He analyzed what had gone wrong. He adjusted his approach, and he decided that his next target would be someone smaller, more vulnerable, easier to control. A girl. Jessica Ridgeway was his first success, the culmination of years of sick fantasies and meticulous planning. What makes this case particularly chilling is the geographical proximity. Austin Sigg lived less than 2 miles from Jessica's house. In a town like Westminster, that practically made them neighbors. It's very likely that Austin had seen Jessica before. Perhaps he had seen her walking to school on previous occasions. Perhaps he had been watching her specifically. studying her routine, waiting for the perfect moment. On Friday, October 5, 2012, he decided that was the day. When Austin Sigg was formally interrogated by police, what emerged from those conversations deeply disturbed everyone involved. Austin spoke without showing any visible remorse. No real emotion. No sign that he understood or cared about the unimaginable suffering he had caused. He described what he had done with clinical, almost scientific detail that chilled the blood of the most experienced detectives in the room. He told how he had been driving through the neighborhood that October morning, how he had seen Jessica walking alone on the sidewalk with her pink backpack and light-up shoes, how he had maneuvered his vehicle to approach her, how he had approached her, probably using some excuse or pretext so as not to alarm her immediately, and how he had forced her into his vehicle. He took her to his house. His mom wasn't there at the time. The house was empty. No one would hear anything. And there, in that house less than 2 miles from where Jessica had grown up, where she had played, where she had laughed with her family, Austin Sigg killed her. The specific details of what he did to Jessica before and after her death are too graphic and disturbing to describe in detail. The authorities never publicly revealed everything they found, and there are good reasons for that. What is known is that after killing her, Austin dismembered her body, and he didn't do it immediately. He kept parts of her body in his house for days. He lived with those remains under the same roof as his mother, acting as if nothing had happened. Eventually, he took Jessica's remains to Patridge Park, 9 miles away, and left them there partially hidden among the vegetation. When asked why he did it, when investigators sought some kind of motive or explanation that could make sense of such a monstrous act, Austin gave an answer that perfectly summarizes the emptiness of his soul. "I always wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. That was it. There was no personal motive. He didn't know Jessica. He had nothing against her. There was no prior connection between them. Jessica Ridgeway, a 10-year-old girl who was simply walking to school as she did every day, was killed because a teenager was curious to know what it felt like to take another human being's life. It was an experiment for him, a fantasy turned into reality, the satisfaction of a sick curiosity. And Jessica, with her pink backpack and light-up shoes, paid the price of that curiosity with her life."